Welcome back to the Pro Sports Podcasters on YouTube. My name is Cobe. Most of you know me as Kobe, and today I'm asking a very specific question in reference to NFL All Day. And that's, is NFL All Day closer to real NFL football, or is NFL All Day closer to fantasy? And as an investor, I would say it's significantly closer to fantasy football. As a collector, it really doesn't matter. Okay, because collectors can make it personal, and as far as personal choice goes, it can be whatever you want it to be. But as an investor, you've really got to look at it like fantasy football. So when I say to you, who's the best quarterback in football right now, it's Tom Brady. If I were to ask you who's the best wide receiver, it's Davante Adams. We can debate about that, but it's Davante Adams. If I was to ask you who's the best running back, it's Christian McCaffrey. And there's no question there in my mind. If I was to ask you who is the best tight end, it's Travis Kelce. And that's not debatable either. But the majority of these players are unlikely to get drafted ahead of other players at their position in fantasy. And that's because fantasy is not about how great a player is and what they can do for their team. Fantasy is all about what can that player do individually for your fantasy squad, which does not take into account what team they play on. And that's how you've got to approach your NFL All-Day collection when it comes to selecting specific moments to potentially pop in performance-based challenges, to use at some point during the season for something like OTM Rumble, and just generally speaking, what they could be worth in the short term, at least, to somebody else, another collector, if you're looking to make a profit. So let's talk about that today. So if we can accept that NFL All Day is closer to fantasy football than the real thing, then when we're building our collections, we've got to look at it from that point of view. And when you look at what's available on the marketplace, something becomes glaringly obvious to me, and I'm going to share that with you today, and that's you need to stack your collection with running backs. I'm basically doubling down here because my last video talked about the 6 common running back moments you need to have. If you haven't seen it, go see it and add those moments to your collection. But when it comes to rares, it's just as important to stack your collection with running backs. And the beauty here is that you don't have to stack too many. Okay, because what's happened is amongst the different players that have been minted as rares, there is a select number that really stand out to me at every offensive position. I'll cover defenses in a future video. But when you compare the available running backs as rares to the available wide receivers, quarterbacks, or tight ends, and the opportunities that can be had in performance-based challenges, and don't forget, Dapper Labs NFL All Day has also talked about doing predictive challenges, right? Setting up a challenge roster before the games actually happen. And if you hit the correct players, you win at that challenge. Running backs are your best opportunity there as well. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but let's start off with the numbers because the numbers are what makes this most viable. When you look at the rare marketplace, these are just rares. You bring up running backs. There's 21 different moments available that are running back rares. 3 of which are historical moments, so you throw those out immediately. Now you've got 18 left, but you really don't because there's a couple of duplicates. So that gets us down to 16 different players that have rares on the NFL All Day marketplace that are currently playing NFL football. And out of those 16, there's actually only 10 that are really viable when it comes to performance-based challenges. You can debate this with me. You can look at them yourselves and decide maybe there's 11. There's not, okay? There's 10. I'm going to stick to it. I don't see how the other 6 can factor into a performance-based challenge this season. Something really off the wall or unfortunate would have to happen to have those other 6 factor in. But you've got 10 that could be a significant factor at some point during the season or pretty much all season long. And that's it. The other beauty is that running backs are kind of disrespected when it comes to their value currently on the NFL All Day marketplace. The collectors are high on wide receivers and they're high on quarterbacks. These are the ones that they've been going after and been driving the prices up on. Running backs get overlooked, even though running backs are probably your best bet to succeed in performance-based challenges on NFL All Day. They're the ones you should have. And that's because they cover so many different categories when it comes to performance. And we'll get into that in a second. But first of all, I want to compare their numbers to their other positional players. So against wide receivers, it's not even a contest. Okay, there are 30 viable wide receiver players on the marketplace for rares. 30 different players, 3 times as much. Do the math. It's obviously going to cost you a lot more to stack your collection with all the wide receivers you require. And I'm talking about people who have a budget here, right? I have a budget. I'm not just spending randomly on these different moments. There are a number of moments I've told you to go ahead and get if you can that I don't currently have in my collection because I didn't have the budget to go ahead and get them at that time. Some of which I wish I did, but I just didn't. So I've got to be selective about which moments I purchase. And when you compare running backs to wide receivers, it's no contest. None. Now, there are certain wide receivers I want for things specifically like OTM Rumble, right? Where I get to select my roster, my fantasy roster, basically. Each individual week, I'm going to look for matchups. There will be certain wide receivers I'm playing because I like the matchup. But for a random performance-based challenge, when you don't know what's going to happen, I'm much better off stacking my collection with running backs and having all the ones I need and not having to worry about not having a few others that maybe went unnoticed. So there's no contest there when it comes to cost. When you look at quarterbacks, there's 14 viable quarterbacks on the rare marketplace. 14 that could factor into performance-based challenges. So not that many more than running backs. But when you look at the cost involved, it's not even close. Your most expensive running back right now is Najee Harris. He's a little over $300. When you look at quarterbacks, there are quarterbacks over 1,000. So it's not even remotely close. It's going to cost you so much more to have all the quarterbacks you require. And again, you could do the cherry pick thing, like you would with the wide receivers, where you're like, I'm not going to buy all 30 wide receivers. I'm going to buy the top 10 that I like. I'm not going to buy all 14 quarterbacks. I'm going to buy 6. Well, you still got that possibility that a random quarterback or a random wide receiver that you did not pick has a huge game, and now you're forced to go in the marketplace and pay up for that particular moment to complete the challenge. Whereas with the running backs, you could have all 10 and never worry. Tight ends. It's a little different. There's actually only 7 different tight ends as rares right now, period. They're not that expensive. Like running backs, they're not valued that highly by the community currently. So you could just buy all 7 and be done with it. So why wouldn't I go there? It's an option. Except that tight ends won't factor into as many different challenges as running backs do. And that's what I want to cover right now. The different challenges available to you. And why running backs are slightly better than the majority of others. Quarterbacks kind of fit their own category because they're the ones throwing the ball. So you could have the number of passing touchdowns, strictly quarterbacks. Right? Passing yards, strictly quarterbacks. They have their own little separate category. But at the same time, they don't infringe on the others. You're not worried about a quarterback factoring into receiving yards or receiving touchdowns. Now, they do, and this is really the only group that can infringe a little bit on the running backs when it comes to rushing touchdowns or rushing yards, because you do have the occasional quarterback that uses their feet a lot, and it's part of the offense. But if you're worried about that, those can be the quarterbacks you add to your collection. Then you're not worried. You might say to yourself, oh, Josh Allen, man, he runs the ball sometimes. So make sure you've got a Josh Allen. Make sure you've got a Jalen Hurts. Add them to your collection. Then you're not worried. That's how you can get around it. Now, when you look at receiving touchdowns, automatically you think wide receivers and tight ends. But you got to factor in running backs. That's a part of the game now. I've had fantasy weeks in the past where running backs had just as many touchdowns receiving as receivers. Christian McCaffrey comes to mind. Austin Eckler comes to mind. quite often those players finish with more receiving yards in a game than rushing yards. They're dual threats, and there's a lot of running backs like that now. So they really bite into the possibility of a tight end or the possibility of a wide receiver when it comes to receiving, not just touchdowns, but yards. When we look at rushing yards, it's running backs, big number one running backs, slight number two quarterbacks, and then you've got a couple of receivers that are gadget receivers like a Deebo Samuel or a Cordell Patterson that also get the occasional handoff and run the ball. But like I said, if you're worried about that, add a Deebo Samuel, add a Cordell Patterson to your collection. Then you're not worried. You're covered. So if you're unsure about what to do offensively and you want to win performance-based challenges without having to spend a lot of money during the season, get your running backs now. If you're so light on wide receivers that you're thinking there's no way I'm going to win wide receiver challenges without spending a lot of money, put your wide receivers up for sale. Put them on the marketplace. Replace them with running backs. The beauty is, depending on which wide receivers you have, they're generally going for more money than running backs. So for each wide receiver you sell, you might be able to get 2 running backs. Same goes for quarterbacks, although if you sell the right quarterback, 1 quarterback gets you 3 running backs. Before you know it, you're completely covered. So that's the strategy to take. That's my best advice to you if you're looking at completing rare challenges during the season without having to go out of pocket at the moment. And it also gives you opportunities with Own the Moment Rumble, their fantasy football variant from Own the Moment, that if a running back goes off on a Thursday night game and you've already got him in your collection, then you've got your hero for that week and everyone else is clamoring in the marketplace to buy one. And the values will skyrocket. And I expect the values of running backs to go up quickly regardless because they're undervalued right now and they're going to show you what they can do early on in the season. It sometimes takes wide receivers a little bit of time to gel during the regular season. Whereas running backs, they can take a handoff and they can do what they do from day one. So watch them succeed early and often and watch those moments go up on the marketplace this particular season. Till next time.